Hello and welcome to Real Obscure. My name is Kevin H. Shaw, and tonight we'll bear witness to the boundaries of science and good taste being pushed to their extremes. From 1985, it's the cult classic adaptation of H.P. Lovecraft's zombie splatterfest, Reanimator. Reanimator was directed by Stuart Gordon, a former theatre director whose works were often considered radical and controversial. His play The Game Show, for example, saw the audience being locked in the theatre and held hostage by the cast, with various members of the troupe being planted in the audience and then abused by the other cast members. And an adaptation of Peter Pan in which Tinkerbell's fairy dust was replaced, at least in the plot I hope, by LSD. The movie's genesis came from a conversation Gordon had one night with a group of friends, where he bemoaned the fact that there were so many adaptations of Dracula, but so few good adaptations of Frankenstein. One of the group asked if he was familiar with Lovecraft's Herbert West Reanimator, and although he had read much of his work, he had not read that particular novella. Intrigued, he sought out a copy, but was only able to find an out-of-print version at the Chicago National Library, which he was only able to handle whilst wearing white gloves and under supervision. Now, as much as H.P. Lovecraft has become something of a household name, many of his works were out of print for a significant amount of time. Despite the efforts of publishers Arkham House, the expense of releasing his works was significant, meaning they tended to only do single, limited print runs of his stories. Times obviously have changed, but it could be argued that Reanimator and the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game were instrumental in reintroducing Lovecraft's work to the next generation. Anyway, Gordon initially planned to adapt Herbert West Reanimator for the stage and then as a 12-episode television drama, even going so far as to write a 30-minute pilot episode. However, when he began collaborating with producer Brian Yuzna, who incredibly recruited Gordon through a Director Wanted ad, he was persuaded to instead write a feature-length script. Working with his friend Dennis Poali, who also adapted From Beyond, Dagon and the Masters of Horror adaptation of Dreams in the Witch House, and writer-actor William Norris, Gordon rewrote his proposed series as a single movie, now simply entitled Reanimator. Now, a lot of Lovecraft purists have argued that Reanimator isn't true to the source material, that Lovecraft would never have written a story with so much gore, that these rampaging zombies aren't the sort of thing the Gentlemen of Providence would ever even dream of basing a story around, and that the entire thing is just too extreme and over the top for a writer whose works concentrated on atmosphere and psychological horror. And if you're in that camp, then I have to ask you, have you actually read Herbert West Reanimator? Because Lovecraft's tale is pure exploitation, featuring exactly the kind of over-the-top gore, violence and visceral horror shown in this movie. Seriously, go read it. There's flesh-eating, rampaging undead, and some extremely grisly sequences of death and dismemberment. Now granted, Lovecraft himself didn't rate this as one of his better stories, and admitted he only penned it for the regular income the serialised story brought him. But I think it's actually just ahead of the curve. He's basically writing a modern zombie movie 40 years before Romero invented the zombie as we now know it. And although Lovecraft didn't particularly enjoy the writing experience, I do wonder how much of that came from the fact that he had to write a recap and end on a cliffhanger with each instalment, rather than it being the actual content of the story that he had a problem with. Anyway, back to the movie. Reanimator stars Jeffrey Combs, Bruce Abbott, Barbara Crampton, and David Gale. Jeffrey Combs began his career as a stage actor before transitioning into film in the early 80s, appearing in the horror movie Frightmare in 1981 and the comedy The Man with Two Brains in 1983. His breakout role came with the release of Reanimator, which was quickly followed by a number of roles in horror, sci-fi and genre movies, including Cyclone, the House on Haunted Hill remake, and The Frighteners. As well as appearing in a number of Lovecraftian adaptations, he also played Lovecraft himself in the movie Necronomicon in 1993. He voiced the Question in the excellent Justice League Unlimited cartoon, and Star Trek fans will know him from his numerous appearances in various Trek franchises, most notably playing the Wayons in Deep Space Nine. Bruce Abbott, like Combs, began his career in theatre as part of Oregon's Shakespeare Festival before relocating to Hollywood to pursue a career in movies. As well as appearing in Reanimator and its first sequel, Abbott also worked extensively in television, playing the lead in 2 seasons of CBS's Dark Justice, plus guest spots on Murder, She Wrote, Beauty and the Beast, and The Net. He is now in semi-retirement from acting and works as an architect. Fun fact, he was once married to the Terminator's Linda Hamilton. Barbara Crampton, after a brief stint in theatre, began her career appearing in soap operas, starring in Days of Our Lives and Santa Barbara. She made her movie debut in Brian De Palma's Body Double, in a role that was sadly cut short from the final release. Following an appearance in the sex comedy Fraternity Vacation, she was cast in Reanimator, the first of the movies that would establish her as an icon of horror cinema, which she followed up with appearances in Chopping Mall, and be sure to check out my episode on that, From Beyond, and Castle Freak. She owns a production company and continues to act, appearing in a number of genre movies including Jacob's Wife, You're Next, and the Lovecraft adaptation Suitable Flesh. They're all excellent, by the way, and I seriously recommend checking them all out. David Gale was a British-born actor who relocated to the US at an early age. Running away from home at the age of 13, he worked in a variety of jobs before joining the Air Force, where he discovered his calling when he joined a small theatre troupe. Throughout the 60s and early 70s, he toured Europe with a variety of companies before relocating to the US. His breakthrough came in 1973 when he was cast in the soap opera The Secret Storm. He worked extensively in television and appeared in both Reanimator and its sequel, Bride of the Reanimator. Sadly, he passed away in 1991 following complications during open-heart surgery. So what's it all about? The movie opens at the University of Zurich, where, alerted by screams coming from his laboratory, a group of staff and security guards are shocked to discover their colleague, Hans Gruber, no, not that one, in his death throes, with student Herbert West kneeling over him holding an empty syringe. They drag West from him, despite his protests, and Gruber rises, clutching at his head as his mouth and then his eyes begin to bleed. His eyeballs explode, showering one of the doctors in a lovely coating of gore, which you better get used to, and he falls to the ground dead. "You killed him," the doctor exclaims to West. "No, I did not," replies West. "I gave him life." And then the titles roll, featuring some fantastic illustrations from Grey's Anatomy, no, not that one, and a score by composer Richard Band, which he says was intended to evoke the style of Bernard Herrmann's Psycho score, which I think is putting it mildly. We're then introduced to Dan Kane, played by Bruce Abbott, a student at the Miskatonic Medical School. He's attempting to resuscitate a flatlining patient, but when he is unable to do so, he is told by the supervising doctor to call it quits. Sometimes you just have to know when to stop, he is told. He's given the task of taking the dead woman's body to the morgue, and once she's stowed away, he discovers Dr. Carl Hill, played by David Gale, using his experimental laser probe on one of the cadavers. As he watches enthralled, the university's dean, Alan Halsey, arrives with a new student, Herbert West, played by Jeffrey Combs. who immediately butts head with Dr. Hill's theories and methods, accusing him of stealing the work of Dr. Gruber and that his theories on brain death are outdated. Halsey changes the subject quickly, inviting Hill over for dinner with him and his daughter Megan. Hill departs, but before he leaves he tells Herbert, "I look forward to seeing you in class, Mr. West." Sometime later, Dan places an ad for a roommate on the notice board as his girlfriend, and the daughter of the dean, Megan, sneaks up on him. They embrace and we segue to the two making love. In a fantastic little sight gag, there's a poster for the band Talking Heads over Dan's bed, which, well, let's just file that away for later. Afterward, Dan pleads with Megan to spend the night at his house, but she refuses, saying her father wouldn't allow it, but that the moment Dan graduates, they'll marry and be together forever. As Dan does a great zombie impression, at least I'm assuming that's what this is, as he's doing a shot-for-shot remake of The Rising Dead from Fulci's movie, they laugh and he chases her to the door. She opens it and is shocked to find Herbert West standing on the doorstep. He states he's come about the room share and begins poking around the house, much to the annoyance of Megan. When West agrees to take the room, proposing he move in immediately as he has all of his stuff outside, Megan shows her displeasure at the prospect, but a wad of cash from Herbert quickly changes Dan's mind and he agrees to allow West to move in. However, Dan soon discovers that there is much more to West than he first assumed. Although they both share the goal of saving lives, West's methods are very different, and when he reveals he is experimenting with a reagent that will bring the dead back to life, Dan finds himself drawn into the dark world of Herbert West, Reanimator. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Lovecraft's original story is an extremely graphic and violent work, featuring the revived rampaging dead and copious amounts of blood and gore, and this movie manages to capture that perfectly. Everything is wet, slimy and bleeding, and it's all realised fantastically with practical effects, puppets and makeup. Stuart Gordon came from a theatre background, and so had a creative way of looking at how to achieve special effects in the live theatre environment. He was able to work with the effects team and the movie's editor to bring the story to life through a variety of simple yet effective techniques. Indeed, the movie only actually features 2 post-production effects: the laser drill and an effect in the film's climax, which I won't spoil here. And okay, a couple of the practical effects are, shall we say, not great. At one point, a decapitated corpse is carrying its head around, and it's quite obvious in these scenes that the medical gown covering the body actor and the head actor is significantly larger than it should be. But generally most of the effects are wonderfully over the top and delightfully splattery, so we can let that one slide. Even today though, the gore is quite shocking, with West at one point running a revenant through with a bone saw, literally pushing his hand through the corpse's back and out through his chest, and there's a decapitation with a shovel that even takes a couple of stomps to sever the spinal column. But the thing is, for all this shocking grand guignol, it's actually a movie with a lot of heart, and I don't just mean the stuff that ends up splattered all over the walls. Abbott is superb as the out-of-depth Dan Kane, somebody who simply wants to save lives, and who, as the story progresses, is forced to make harder and harder decisions as to just how far he will go to do that. Crampton is, as ever, superb as Megan, torn between her love for Abbott and the unease at the way he's being manipulated by West. Without going too far into spoilers at this point, Megan is really put through the ringer in this one, and Crampton really gets to flex her acting chops, running a whole range of emotions. And the two of them have great chemistry together. Crampton actually admitted to falling for Abbott, but as both were in relationships at the time, they never acted on it. And then there's Combs's performance as West. He's the smartest man in the room, but is incapable of doing a good job of hiding it. Or rather, he doesn't want to hide it. his work is everything, and anybody who disagrees with him or stands in his way is a fool and must stand aside. This leads to some great one-liners, and his dark, sardonic sense of humour features throughout the movie, which is sure to elicit a few grim smiles from the viewer. Anyway, it's now time to discuss the movie's climax as we enter the spoiler zone. Following a demonstration of his reagent, in which West reanimates Kane's cat twice, Dan reluctantly agrees to help West with his experiments. The two enter the morgue and successfully resurrect a dead body. Although successful isn't exactly the right word, as the body immediately attacks the two students. Meanwhile, Dean Halsey, angered when he discovers Kane's involvement with his daughter and West's unauthorized experiments, arrives just in time to die at the hands of the reanimated corpse. West, seeing an opportunity to further test his solution, and Dan, realizing this might be his only way to save the Dean's life, injects him with the reagent. He returns to a semblance of life, but is left a shambling, mindless zombie. Dr. Hill takes charge of Halsey, despite Megan's protests, and it soon becomes clear he has designs on the Dean's daughter. She returns home to find Dan waiting for her, and he explains what happened to her father, that he isn't suffering from some form of breakdown, and is in fact dead. Hill, meanwhile, breaks into West's basement laboratory and threatens to expose him and his work unless he hands over the serum and all his notes. West agrees, but as Hill is distracted by a demonstration of the reagent, he kills him with a shovel, decapitating him, and then, in a fit of madness driven by his desire for knowledge, injects Hill with the reagent. The revived Hill retains his intelligence, but as West talks with him, his reanimated body ambushes him from behind, knocking him unconscious. Kane and Megan, meanwhile, break into Hill's office, where they discover a creepy file filled with newspaper clippings and photos of Megan, and even a lock of her hair. They also discover that her father, who Hill is keeping in his officer's padded cell, has been subjected to Hill's laser drill and has now been lobotomized. Remember what I said about Megan going through the ringer? West awakens to find the reanimated Dr. Hill has stolen his research and the serum he kept in the basement. Dan arrives home to find West in a distraught state and explains that Hill lobotomized Dean Halsey so he could exert some form of control over him. There is actually a cut subplot that involved Hill having mesmeric powers, but they decided that it just slowed things down too much, and honestly, who cares how he's controlling the dead? Anyway, Dan also explains that they found a creepy file on Megan. Learning that the reanimated Dr. Hill is on the loose, Kane leaves to go and find Megan. Meanwhile, Hill makes his way to the morgue, where he sets about lobotomizing more corpses. As he's doing so, Dean Halsey is dispatched to fetch Megan and, after beating Kane unconscious, returns to Hill with his daughter in tow. She is stripped and strapped to a gurney where the decapitated head of Hill tries to, shall we say, become more familiar with her. Kane and West arrive in time to save her, but Hill reveals his legion of the undead, who spring into action and attack the trio. Megan appeals to her father, who is able to overcome Dr. Hill's control, and grabbing his decapitated head, squeezes the life from it before hurling it into the hallway. Sorry, it's just hilarious when you actually see it. West, meanwhile, attempts to kill Hill's body by injecting it with an overdose of his reagent. However, the body mutates, and wrapped in its tentacle-like intestines, West realizes he cannot escape, and so throws his bag of notes and remaining serum to Dan as he escapes with Megan. However, before they can reach freedom, the pair are ambushed by the last of Hill's zombies, who chokes Megan to death. Dan carries her to a recovery room, but the doctors are unable to save her life. Desperate, Kane reaches into West's bag and pulls out the reagent. He fills a syringe and, kissing Megan, inserts the needle into her neck. The screen fades to black, save for the glowing syringe, which we see is injected into Megan, and as the movie ends, we hear her scream. The original idea was for Crampton to return in the sequel, Bride of Reanimator, but when Gordon declined to direct it, Yuzna wrote his own screenplay, in which only the heart of her character appears, being transplanted into a new body West and Kane have made from reanimated body parts. It's a shame, as Crampton is a fantastic actor, and it would have been great to see how she would have handled playing what would, essentially, be a new version of the character. Reanimator proved to be a success for Empire Pictures, going on to spawn 2 sequels, the aforementioned Bride of Reanimator, which saw the return of Coombs and Abbott and was based on the second half of Lovecraft's tale, and Beyond Reanimator, in which Coombs reprised the role in a movie based on an original story. More recently, Full Moon Productions rebooted the series with The Resonator Miskatonic U, a reboot of From Beyond, and its sequel, Beyond the Resonator, although both fail to capture the manic energy and smarts of either original. Gordon originally planned to emulate Corman's Poe movies, intending to release a series of works based on Lovecraft's writing. He did indeed follow up Reanimator with From Beyond, which saw Combs and Crampton reunited on screen, a pairing that was later repeated for his 1995 movie Castle Freak, the story of which in part was inspired by Lovecraft's The Outsider. And although Gordon wasn't involved, Crampton, Combs and Gale also reunited on another Lovecraft adaptation. Although Gordon wasn't involved, Crampton, Combs and Gale also reunited on another Lovecraft adaptation for the aborted Pulse Pounders anthology, in the entry The Evil Clergyman, directed by Charles Band. Long thought lost, a work print was found in 2011, and after being restored, it was released as a standalone short. Gordon went on to find success elsewhere, writing and directing more features for Empire, including Robojocks and Dolls, adapting Poe's The Pit and the Pendulum in 1991, and penning the Disney movie Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. Things went quiet on the Lovecraft front for Gordon until 2001, when he returned to the Cthulhu mythos with his adaptation of The Shadow over Innsmouth, the confusingly titled Dagon. Dagon being an entirely different Lovecraft story. And he did revisit Lovecraft's work for his episode of The Masters of Horror, featuring an adaptation of The Dreams in the Witch House. Sadly, this would prove to be the last entry in his Lovecraft cycle, as Stuart Gordon passed away in 2020. Now, before I sign off, just a quick note. 2025 saw the 40th anniversary of Reanimator's release, and to celebrate, Ignite Films and Eagle Rock Pictures released an absolutely superb 4K UHD restoration of the movie. It's packed with extras including commentary tracks, interviews, and even a second cut of the movie. If you're a fan of Reanimator or you've never seen it but want to experience it in the best possible way, then I highly recommend picking up a copy, as it's absolutely fantastic. And on that note, thanks for listening, and I'll see you all on the next episode of Real Obscure. This episode of Real Obscure was written, produced, and revitalised with a mysterious glowing serum by me, Kevin H. Shaw. If you enjoyed this episode, then please be sure to like, share and subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube and would like to help Real Obscure with a financial donation, you can do so using the thanks option, available on each video. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode and this movie, so please feel free to comment. Or you can email the show at hellorealobscure@gmail.com. You can also visit the show's website at realobscurepod.com, and I'm on Blue Sky using the handle @realobscurepod. Reanimator is copyright 1985. All content here is used for educational and commentary purposes under Section 107 of the Copyright Act Fair Use, and remains the property of the respective copyright holders. Presented here for the purposes of critique, commentary and discussion. No copyright infringement is intended. So please, don't sue me or strap me naked to a gurney.